Good morning and welcome to a very early morning session of Men Who Understood the Times. I am Pastor Michael Zarling with Pastor Andy Miller, and Josh Nelson had to step away for this week, and so we have Dr. Phil Hahn this morning. So, Phil, what are you drinking this morning?
I have hotel black coffee.
Andy, what do you have?
Well, this is episode appropriate. I've got black coffee also, little shot, like tiny dripper of cream, but sponsored by the M Casino, which is just
Here you
a
go.
couple miles south of me in Las Vegas.
That is applicable for this episode. So, Phil, thanks for stepping in. So, Phil is a layman. So, Phil, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a layman. I live in Madison, Alabama. I go to Lamb of God Lutheran Church down there. I am an engineer, about 20 years into my career, and I've got a couple kids in college.
Yeah. So you literally are a doctor, correct?
I am. Yeah, not a
Yeah.
medical one, but
Yeah.
a
And
mechanical one.
and yeah, mechanical engineer. So a real rocket scientist, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can follow Phil on Substack. He's the one that puts our menu understood the times on Substack. I don't even know what that is, but Phil got me onto it, and you can follow Phil with the other Dr. Phil, right? Is that what you are there?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an old joke that probably you don't get unless you're older, but yeah.
Yeah. So I begin today with our disclaimer that Phil is not talking for his church, and Andy and I are not speaking for our churches or for our church body. That we're just three guys very early on a Saturday morning. And when I say early, the last couple have been at 7 o'clock. Today is at 6 because I don't understand the whole time zone thing because they said, oh, let's do, what was it, 8 o'clock Eastern, and I forget that there's Eastern and then Central and then Mountain and then whatever time you're on, Andy. So yours is really early this morning, aren't you?
I was up at 4:30, my friend.
Well, I was too, but I was reading a book on Dracula. Uh, we are just three guys, two pastors and a layman, speaking, trying to apply scripture to the issues of the day. And our encouragement with all of these things, because we know we're touching on some touchy subjects, is if you have an issue with us and something we said, fantastic. Reach out to us. That's Matthew 18. If a brother sins against you, go and show him his fault just between the two of you. If you feel it's more public, because these podcasts are public. They're out there on Facebook and Instagram, Substack, YouTube. You can uh, talk about us and to us publicly there. There would be Galatians chapter 2 as the Apostle Paul calls out the Apostle Peter publicly and in scripture for everyone to see from now on. But then probably the best thing, though, is yeah, reach out to us on our podcast on Raised with Jesus. My email is always there. Andy is there. Josh is there. You can find our emails and contact information on the Wells website and so forth. So text us, call us, email us. Don't bother Phil yet. He hasn't said anything too difficult until today. So today, Andy wanted to talk about this subject. Is gambling permissible for Christians? So the first topic with this is specific types of gambling. So Andy, since this is your subject, and this probably has a meaning for you, because how long have you been in Las Vegas as a pastor?
Lucky number 13 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
It's apropos. Yeah, but I think we should talk about luck, obviously, throughout the course of this too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different types of gambling. I suppose the most commonly observed here in Las Vegas and that I see even socially is sports betting. So we went bowling a couple weeks ago with some friends on a Saturday night, and it was the night before the Super Bowl. And the parking lot, it took us 5-10 minutes to find a spot because the parking lot was absolutely packed with people making their last minute bets on the Super Bowl. So there's that, but there's also horse betting that's still, believe it or not, it's a dinosaur, but there's a few holdouts that are still doing horse betting too. And there's now online gaming, which is online betting you can do almost anywhere with the apps that are furnished by a lot of the casinos or the big corporations. And then you've got online gambling, as in like you can play online poker. And I'm aware of people within my sphere whose job is wife has a day job and the person plays like 5 different tables of online poker at night as a job. So now, not a member of our church per se, not yet, but I would consider this family prospective. And but that's a real thing. It's a profession. And there's another person I know as well whose primary means of income was playing high limit Omaha poker here in Las Vegas. And you have to kind of shop the casinos a little bit because the clientele at the tables will shift and change. So this is a very real issue for people, especially in my sphere. But if you live in a lot of other states, if you live in Michigan, we have a great Wells presence in Michigan, and there are a lot of casinos there. There are a lot of casinos in Canada, and I'm sure they're springing up everywhere else too. Down by Phil, you probably got the riverboat gambling types, right?
So not in Alabama yet. Casinos, there are a couple small Indian casinos, but they're kind of questionable. But Mississippi is where most people would go to gamble.
Yeah. Oh, Phil, you want to talk about any other types of specific gambling?
Sure. Right. So then, Andy talked about, sports betting and horse betting, and you've got, just your typical casino establishment, whether it's the video gaming, poker or slot machines, or, various table games where you're rolling dice or flipping cards. Um, uh, I'll echo what Andy said, though. I think the really dangerous one is the online gaming when you have an app on your phone and it's just there's no friction at all to get into it. A physical casino, at least there's the friction of getting there and getting in and putting your money down on the table. But once you've got an app set up that's linked to your credit card, there's no friction and they love it, I'm sure.
Yeah. So have you guys seen the movies, the Thomas Crown Affair? Either one, the previous one. Okay, so there's an older one, a newer one, well, newer being like probably late 80s, early 90s. For some reason, I just watched those the last couple of weeks. God must have known that we were going to be talking about this, Andy. But but in that, Thomas Crown, he's very wealthy. He's an investor. He has high stakes gambling. In the first movie, the whole setup is Thomas Crown sets up a bank heist. In the second movie, he sets up where he steals a very expensive painting, like $11 million painting from a museum. But then throughout the movie, there's polo, boating, both of them. And I laughed in the second Thomas Crown Affair because they brought in the gliding with the plane because that was in the first movie too. You've got golf shots where they're betting hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a shot out of the sand. Okay, because these guys have so much money and they're so successful, they're always looking for a bigger high. And I think that's what we can talk about with here too, uh, because there is a high when you have a job well done. So if I'm able to go fat biking today and I make it to the top of Casper Mountain up a really tough part, yeah, there's a high there. Or in Colorado, I just learned this phrase a little while ago of accomplishing a 14er. Okay, so that's 14,000 feet. We don't have any of those. The biggest we have is 13s here in Wyoming. Well, if you're able to accomplish that, there is a physical high because you accomplish something difficult, and that can be good and God pleasing and sanctified. But the devil always twists everything. He always perverts it. And so he takes this looking for a high and he makes it so that you're always having to do something bigger, something more dangerous. And that's really the essence of the Thomas Crown movies, and a lot having to do with the gambling is you're always looking for that bigger high to accomplish something better. So going on to the next then bullet point, and if you want to talk about the increasing prevalence of gambling, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but because we're going to be talking the third point about the addiction and so forth.
Sure. And unfortunately, I didn't do any statistical research, but that's got to be easy to find. But I think you
I've
can
got some.
tell.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got some
Well,
when we get to it, but
you can tell though that it's become more prevalent because of the apps we've already mentioned. Moreover, I think every pastor could furnish some examples of either prospects that have come into their church or little old ladies maybe who say, "Hey, can we start a bunco group?"
mm,
And they don't tell you up front that they want to do it for quarters, you know, or what, at our last church, we used to have bingo night. Pastor, can we do bingo night? And what it is I don't know that any little old lady say, and I'm not trying to over generalize here, but just I don't know that any individual in church is necessarily trying to unnecessarily expose the resources that God has gifted a group of Christians within a church family to crazy risk. I mean, I myself only gamble on love. However, however, there is a prevalence of like an addiction to the rush that you were just describing, that high, and the chasing of the unknown for the surprise high that you get as a result. And I think that would be addictive to the masses.
yeah. So I'll give you some statistics here, and then you can react to these, Phil, with the increasing prevalence. So this is from the American Gaming Association, or here's called AGA. So AGA research shows that more than half of all American adults, 57%, participated in some form of gambling in the past year. More than a quarter of adults, 30%, gambled at a physical casino in the past year, while 21% placed a sports bet. The record level of engagement with the gaming industry comes as 9 in 10 Americans find casino gambling to be acceptable for themselves or others, and 62% now find gambling to be personally acceptable. So 134 million Americans, or 53% of the population, visited a casino for gambling or other entertainment purposes in the past 12 months, the highest level of casino visitation on record. So I've got some more statistics I'll share later, but if you want to react to that, Bill, of that prevalence.
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't heard those numbers, but that sounds higher than I would have thought just based on casual conversation, right? When you talk to people, I don't know a whole lot of people that willingly offer that they spend a whole lot of time in casinos. Maybe sports betting is a little bit different. I do know some people who sports bet. Um, but yeah, no, that's a lot of people if you're talking like half the people physically visiting a casino in the last year,
Yeah.
especially when you have so many states that don't have casinos and people are, traveling or making it part of their vacation.
Yeah, and yeah, that's one of the things we're going to look at is it does become part of their travel, part of their vacation. In Wisconsin, where I just moved from, got Indian casinos all over the place, and that's a big destination for it. Uh, and because I remember going with my daughters when they were younger, so not legal betting age, and we went to a concert at one of the casinos in Milwaukee, and I got talked to by an attendant, and I guess it was good because the daughter was underage. We were just trying to find a bathroom, and we had wandered into the gambling section of the casino, and she was very very good at saying, "Well, you can go over here, but you have to come right back." Okay, but it's a big destination. So they also write key areas of increasing gambling prevalence. Mobile and online platforms. Mobile betting has transformed the landscape, similar to how synthetic drugs altered the drug landscape, bringing instant, high speed, 24/7 access to users' fingertips. And I thought, Phil, you had a really great point if you don't have that filter anymore. Kind of like when we talked a long time ago about pornography, when you don't have that filter of physically going into a movie theater, physically going into a gas station, buying a magazine or whatever it is, it's just right there on your computer or your phone. Do you want to touch? Did you want to touch
Yeah,
on
and
that?
I think the other aspect is a lot of, especially men, have been primed for that sort of thing because of video games, right? Which
Mm.
video games may make a really good episode, right? Because, like you talked about earlier, they set up these games so that you get a little dopamine hit and a little dopamine hit, and you got to keep working to get those dopamine hits. And then you get a sense of accomplishment, but your real accomplishment is what you have some, digital property that means absolutely nothing. Video games, at least, there's a fairly low barrier to entry. They don't cost a whole lot. Maybe there's a small monthly subscription, but then it's just, a half step to going from a game on your phone to a casino on your phone and a credit card on file. And, then you've already been primed for, using that device to get your pleasure, and now it's costing you an arm and a leg, and you're doing things that a video game may have felt like gambling, right? You take certain risks and you get certain rewards, but now you've moved on from pretending to doing something real.
Yeah, and with that, when we talk about the video game in a different episode, we can touch on this more deeply. But something you said reminded me of this, that in the video games, for example, when I was a kid, I had like the Atari 2600. That's how old I am. Okay. I Yeah, I know, Annie, thanks for that look. When I would talk to my kids in catechism class and we talk about uh, Ahab and wanting the vineyard and wanting to exchange his better vineyard for the other vineyard. I said, well, hey, would you guys be willing to trade my PlayStation 2 for whatever your new thing is? Because I know how old the PlayStation 2 is too. Uh, but the thing is, with those kinds of games, there was always an end. Okay, you accomplish something, there was an end. But the new games, and new being the last decade or whatever, there really is no end. You just keep going. You get that dopamine hit, but you keep going, and that leads into the betting as well. Uh, Also with this, sports betting and in-game wagering. So I had not thought of this, that the 2018 Supreme Court case where the court legalized sports books, a venue where people can wager on various sports competitions. So the case was Murphy versus the NCAA. That one decision led to over 45% of sports wagers now occurring online, with in-play betting allowing bets on specific live game actions, which increases risk. Andy, you're in Las Vegas. What does that mean? In-play betting and so forth. If you want to explain that to our listeners.
Sure. So it's live action betting. So if it's halftime of a game, say, you can still place a bet on the over under of what a certain player will score in the second half, or the outcome of a game in a quarter. Or you can make what are called parlay bets, where you have, for example, who will be the first player to touch the ball in the second half. These are all types of things that you can do, and it varies by sport, obviously. By the way, another key element we haven't mentioned yet, and Phil brought this up in some of our discussions prior, which is really good. But when I open, so I have a Robinhood app, and I just have a small amount of money in there that I wheel and deal with a little bit in the stock market, but it's not really at risk, because those are funds that if we lost them, we're not really relying upon at all. And I don't do the prediction market, say, but there are these what are they called? Like basically prediction market things that you can bet on now when it comes to yes or no's on Supreme Court decisions, or various government policy things, or even economic or sports. It crosses commercial lines now, even outside of traditional betting forums like sports.
Yeah, Phil, you had brought that up in our discussion. If you want to talk about what is prediction marketing.
Yeah, so I mean, Andy gave a pretty good explanation. So there's places like Polymarket where they can set up a market for an event, right? So it could be an election, it could be, like Andy mentioned, policy things. It could even be, silly other things, just something that has a yes or no outcome essentially. And so then people will basically say, I think this thing is going to happen, so they buy the yes shares, and or I don't think it's going to happen, so they buy the no shares. And then there's basically a market price very similar to, if you had a stock that could go between $0 and $1, and based on the purchasing pressure, that stock would go up or down. And so some people do it because, well, I mean, it's just another form of gambling in a sense. Some people will do it because they may have insider information. So actually, I was just listening to a Joe Rogan podcast where they canceled a number of fights because of insider information, boxing, MMA type fights, because people were manipulating prediction markets on the outcome of the event. And so the FBI was actually involved and they saw this ridiculous pressure for a very ridiculous outcome. And they said, let's just not have that fight and give everyone their money back. Right.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the basics of it. So yeah, again, the buying pressure on it, kind of like a stock, will move it, and then the people get paid on the outcome. So if you thought it would happen, you would get your maybe you got in it was a 30% probability, so you paid 30 cents, and if it hits, so to speak, you would get your dollar versus if it didn't hit, you'd lose that 30 cents.
Yeah, if you want to react to this too, and you've got two more bullet points, and I'll give you two of them, Phil. So one is normalization in media and marketing. Gambling, particularly sports betting, is heavily promoted in and during live sports social media and using risk-free promotion. So the key is this has been normalized in the past. People looked at this was bad, okay, and then now it's just become a part of our culture. And then since you're in Vegas, the AGA also talked about physical venues and local access. In addition to major hubs like Las Vegas, gambling is expanding into local venues such as bars, restaurants, and convenience stores. So if you want to touch on those things about the normalization and then how it's just ubiquitous, it's everywhere.
It is everywhere. It's kind of fascinating in a way. It's a totally different culture in that way in Vegas. Like in Michigan, if we wanted to go bowling, we went to the local bowling alley. But in Vegas, you want to go bowling, you go to the local casino. So you got to walk past all they're not one-arm bandits anymore. They're like five-button bandits now because everything's digital. And so everything within it is algorithmic too. So you're really playing against a computer more than anything. But to the point of your quote there, so if I were to go to a couple well-known local establishments, one is called the Village Pub. They have excellent food, especially breakfast food, which we're all kind of pining for right now. And then also there's something called PT's Pub, has great bar food, but around the bars in there are video poker machines. And that's one of the primary ways that they generate income to make margin or to stay in the black, because they might have two cars in the parking lot, but as long as the one or two people from those vehicles are playing video poker all night, they can fund their cook and they can fund their server or their bartender. So in Vegas in general, what a lot of people may not know is that on the strip, at least, the primary source of revenue is actually conventions. But let's not pretend like they failed to make a penny or two on gambling as well. So gambling is still vintage Vegas. It's just that, yes, locally, it's all over the place.
Yeah. And then Phil, if you want to react to this part of uh, the youth and young adult participation, you kind of touched on a little bit, but they say the majority of online sports bettors are younger males, with studies indicating rising risks for adolescents who are exposed to social media marketing. So if you want to just kind of touch on that, how maybe we as men, because the next bullet point is going to be talking about addiction, how we as men, but especially young men, are getting into this.
Yeah, again, I think it's kind of the slippery slope we talked about earlier, right? We've normalized doing so much on our phones, including entertainment. It just becomes a different source of entertainment. And maybe there's a transition as a young man's growing up from living in a fantasy world and playing fantasy games to moving into playing games that are more tied to real life, right? Their sports interests or their other hobbies that might involve sports. So it kind of becomes more real and more tied to their identity as a young man who loves their Green Bay Packers or their Milwaukee Brewers or whatever their team might be.
There you go. Do you even have any professional teams down in Alabama?
No, we used to have the feeder team for the Brewers. It was the Huntsville Stars. Now we got the Madison Trash Pandas. So we got this awesome logo with this
That is good.
trash panda and in his garbage can with a rocket coming out the back end. So, but so
Mike,
yeah, we've got minor
could I
league teams, and
chime in
then
there?
minor league soccer and
Yep.
hockey, oddly enough, is
Yeah.
popular. We have a semi-pro team, and then the local college has a team.
I thought you were going to say your professional team was the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I don't get into the college stuff, but yeah,
Yeah.
no, you're either Auburn or
I,
Alabama.
I'm teasing because I'm living in Wyoming here. We don't have any professional sports teams either. Our closest one is a feeder team for I'm not even sure, but we're the Casper Spuds. So we don't even grow potatoes here, but the team came from somewhere else that had potatoes, probably Idaho. What were we going to jump in with, Andy?
Well, that sounds like a business opportunity out there, Mike. You could start distilling vodka.
Well, yeah, there you go. They are trying to get the Savannah Bananas here, which is awesome, but I don't think they're ever going to play here because they're filling up Major League Baseball stadiums. So they can get like 50, 60, 70,000 at a in a stadium. 59,000 is the population of Casper. Okay, so we'd have to be pulling from all over the place too. What else are you going to say about
Yeah,
that,
well, so
Andy?
Phil alluded to this, but this is an important part of the whole discussion, and maybe this will bleed into what we've got coming next too. But the integrity of a lot of things is diminished by gambling, isn't it? So the corporations have a vested interest in accommodating the gambling market because there's more interest in their games. But what happens at the corporate level, there's more money and more resources for obvious reasons. What happens at the fan level is kind of like what happens with fantasy football. You end up watching the sport or uh, entering into the game without care for the actual outcome, but just care for like the individual players or the performances or the scores. It really just sort of ruins the integrity of the competition, and that's really one of the core issues here too. Is it's keying on the motive now, isn't it? Uh, Probably the reason Phil doesn't care for the Crimson Tide, in part, is because of NIL now. College sports has been completely ruined by the money involved. And you got to think that a lot of that money is not just from marketing and name, image, and likeness. You know, it's the bets people are laying on, which feed that machine.
Right, and then with that is fantasy football too. A lot of young men, women too, but a lot of men get into that kind of stuff, and then that can just lead to other things. So that leads to the addictiveness of greed. So I'll give you some statistics, and then Andy, you can respond to this. So key gambling addiction statistics, prevalence roughly 2.6% to 4.6% of the US population has a gambling issue. So 2.5 million US adults have a severe gambling problem, with another 5 to 8 million experiencing moderate issues. That is a lot of people. The youth risk, 10 to 15% of youth report significant gambling problems, with high schoolers 4 times more likely than adults to develop gambling addiction. About 60 to 80% of high school students report gambling before age 21. Uh, and then one more concurrence, co-occurrence. Gambling addiction is often paired with other disorders. 50% of people with gambling problems have a mood disorder, for example, depression, and 17% have alcohol abuse or dependence. So if you want to talk about that addictiveness of greed.
Well, the scriptures tell us that money is a root of all evil, isn't it? And so greed can lead to a lot of problems. Think of the Old Testament king Ahaz, whose wife Jezebel was, he was looking after, he was looking covetously on Naboth's vineyard, didn't get it. His wife orchestrated the scheme to secure the property for him, and it ultimately led to murder. So the covetousness and the greed of his heart led to just terrible other sins. Anecdotally, in Vegas, you stay here long enough, you meet people whose lives have been completely turned upside down. Recently met a woman whose um, husband is thinking about leaving her because she blew through all their savings with a gambling addiction, and have met endless amounts of homeless guys who they don't have other issues, physical or mental, or substance abuse. They have an addiction to gambling, and they have impoverished themselves by doing so. And now they're on the street fighting for their own livelihood. So it is an absolutely destructive habit at its extreme. But of course, it is an outgrowth of wrong motives.
Yeah, if you want to respond to that too, Bill. So another thing is the financial and social consequences that Annie just touched on. So debt. The average loss that triggers gambling related debt is approximately $55,000. Okay, that's Annie, that's like our salaries, a yearly salary, good salary, you know, half, half of $100,000, that's how much now you're in debt. And then warning signs. Individuals often chase losses, feel restless when trying to stop, and in 90% of the cases use credit card cash advances to fund betting, which is like 18%. And now you're putting yourself more in debt. So if you want to respond to that, Phil, of that the addictiveness of greed.
Yeah, no, chasing losses again is a psychological thing where, you feel like you had a bad run, but you've got to revert to the mean eventually, but that mean reversion may not happen in any reasonable time frame, right? And there's no reason to expect it either. Especially because virtually every form of betting, there is some cut that the house gets, right? So even if you put in $1 and you get back 99 cents, you should expect over a long enough time frame that goes to zero. You may be able to ride it for quite a while, but it goes to zero. And then just our society, the way we look at money, both acquiring it and also how easily we can mortgage ourselves into debt, whether it's credit card debt, whether it's a home equity line of credit, or just, using credit cards. We don't, money has almost not become a tangible thing. It's more of a number on a sheet of paper or a number on a computer screen. We've moved to plastic. And so maybe tracking it and realizing what you're actually doing with that money has become more difficult with time.
Sure. Yeah, the old days, and this is even before my time, Andy, where the wives would be saving money by putting things into envelopes. They put their money in an envelope to pay for, the washing machine and then here for the car and so forth. So you actually had physical money.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that because I had plenty of older ladies. That's what they would do for their offerings when I would go as a home visiting them as a homebound members, pull it out of this envelope to put it in for the church. Okay. Yeah, we're not physical anymore. And then, the danger of this greed. I had written down some people from scripture, notable people that fell from grace because of their desire for money, for greed. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 apostles, betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5. They sold their property, but secretly withheld proceedings until the Holy Spirit, they're lying to the Holy Spirit, and then God struck them dead. Achan in Joshua 7. He stole forbidden items, the spoils of war from Jericho, resulting in Israel's defeat and then his own death. Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, that he lied to get money and clothing from Naaman, and resulting that now he got Naaman's leprosy. You mentioned King Ahab, Balaam, a prophet tempted by the promise of financial reward. So greed to curse Israel. Abimelech ruthlessly murdered his brothers to seize kingship, driven by the ambition and greed, leading to his own rule. Two more. The rich fool, Jesus talks about in Luke 12, a man in a parable who hoarded wealth and died prematurely, having neglected his soul. And then, Simon the sorcerer. We still use that phrase simony in Acts chapter 8, attempting to buy power of the Holy Spirit with money. And then, before we move on to the next point, if you want to touch on this, Andy, about coveting. Okay, we don't use that word too often, but Exodus 20, verse 17, God says at the end of the commandments, You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. It's one commandment. Martin Luther, he divided that into two commandments because he felt that coveting your neighbor's wife was a different sin in the heart than coveting your neighbor's ox. Okay. But if you want to talk about that coveting.
Sure. Well, a couple things first. What we're talking about here too, latent within this motivation is an overbelief. Superstition. To be stitious is to believe in something, and to be superstitious is to overbelieve. You're putting too much stock into moral or immoral holding, and so fundamental to inappropriate gambling or illegal gambling, say, is a superstition, an overbelief in something. And it might be, in many cases, simple luck, right? Where I believe that if I'm on a roll, I'm lucky that I'm going to get rewarded tonight. Well, what actually falls outside the watchful eye or the preservational control or provisional control, for that matter, of our God? Nothing does. So we really, before we poo-poo all gambling or all motives, say, what we do want to poo-poo, what we want to absolutely dismiss, is the existence of luck, as though there is any chance to the life that God has given us. But now, to your point, the concept of coveting, it's one of the commandments, or a combination of a tandem set of commandments that really deals most exclusively with motive, doesn't it? I mean, honoring your parents, that is your physical manifestation of respect and verbal support of the parents God gave you. Fifth commandment, honoring someone's life. Sixth commandment, adultery. Now, I understand all these things tie back to the heart. Jesus teaches us that especially. However, on paper, at least, right up front, coveting is the one that says, in your heart and mind, you must be pure and not want something that God has clearly intended to withhold from you. And there is that element in gambling, isn't there, where you are essentially trying to earn something for yourself, not by serving another and being paid a wage for it, but by taking advantage of someone else's loss, whether the person who's losing is the house, or whether the person who's losing is, the person that you're playing against. So coveting is really at its core a motivational issue, and the Lord addresses us and says, I don't just want your thoughts, your words and actions to be pure. I want your heart and motives to be pure too.
So with that, uh, Phil, what do you think of this? Can you have proper gambling? Can you gamble without greed, without coveting? Can you have a motivated gambling, sanctified gambling where it's just entertainment?
That's a very good question, and I will give you what my answer is based on things I've done in the past. So, if you go to New York, you might go out to a dinner and you might go out to a show with your wife, and that would be an enjoyable evening. I every 18 months or so spend about a month in Buffalo, New York, and just due to the nature of the work, I can't go home. So I typically bring my wife up halfway through because it's, good for husband and wife to spend time together and not be apart that long. There's not a whole lot to do in Buffalo. So one of the things we have done in the past is you go to Duff's and you go get your wings. And then there's a bunch of casinos right there. And so we have, with a defined budget, that we might have spent on some other form of entertainment if we were in some other place. We have gone into a casino and played table games just with a minimum bet and enjoyed the environment and left. So in my opinion, it is possible to use as a source of purely entertainment. I would caveat that in two ways. One, if I had a casino in my backyard, I would not frequent it. I wouldn't go there at all because of the impression it might give to my coworkers and people at church. But And I realize the argument is kind of difficult because I'm basically relying on a sense of anonymity, right? I'm at a casino, no one knows who I am. I'm not leaving a improper impression, so to speak, on people that I have a relationship with. But I will say I don't necessarily think that that is sinful if your motive is simply that you're enjoying your time and you're not spending copious amounts of money to do it.
Sure. So I've only been to Las Vegas one time, Andy, and that
You're
was
missing
several
out. You're
years.
missing out.
Yeah. Well, I am not missing out on the pot smell that I it smelled everywhere. But that's not just in Vegas. It can be
That's
anywhere.
only
It's
in my
just
corner
seasonal.
of town.
Okay. Uh, it, and I was there because you mentioned a big part of Vegas is conferences, because I was on the board for all missions as the district mission board chairman. And because we were going to be gearing up for this 110 years, 100 new mission starts in 10 years, the board for all missions wanted everyone there, not just the mission counselors and the district mission board chairman like I was, and one representative like we have for most meetings. They want everyone, pastors, teachers, lay people, all in one place. Well, there's no place in Milwaukee that was big enough. And who wants to go to Milwaukee in the end of January for a meeting? But Vegas was fantastic. It was a t-shirt or a light sweatshirt walking around, and there was one night afterwards. We were done with our conference that I walked around with a couple of guys. They were placing bets, like Phil said. See, for me, I'm too cheap. I did not place a single bet. I just watched them play. But I think of back in college. We played sheepshead late at night because there was nothing to do in Watertown either, and we would play for nickels. But one guy, Max, he would keep the score sheet, and then whoever won, and there was one guy, he would always make sure he'd walk around the next week. I have the sheet. He'd make sure. Let us know. We need to pay him our nickels. Or even here at church. Uh, we had the Vikings playing with, because we don't have a professional sports team. Number of guys like the Vikings for some reason, and they had grown up in South Dakota, so that was their team. And I'm a
What a
Packer
horrible
fan.
place to live.
Yeah, and uh, so I bet them, and I said uh, if you guys win, I'll wear a Vikings jersey to teach Bible study the next week. If you win, you have to wear the Packer jersey for church. And so the Packers won, and so these guys are wearing their Packer jerseys for ushering and so forth. That was all good natured fun. I've also told some guys at church, because I crushed them in bags or cornhole, said, don't ever play me in anything I suggest. That's my tip to you, because that means I'm actually decent at it. If you suggest something, like we went shooting yesterday, and I'm horrible at that. So if you want to bet me with that, I probably won't bet because I know I'm going to lose. Uh, but there's entertainment. So if you want to touch on, Andy, too, the entertainment value of gambling.
Sure. By the way, a big element of gambling that we forgot to discuss earlier as one of the iterations is the lottery. Think of
Mm.
how many people who don't have a casino in their state but addictively spend money every week or every month on playing the lotto. That is, or Keno, for example. You can do that at any Wisconsin pub, I'm sure. But there's just the prevalence is something we've spoken to already. But in those cases, what's the idea? The idea is making a quick buck without having to work for it. And you may not be thinking that you're exploiting another, but what you are doing at the very least is you're trying to make, you're trying to make a means of income without having to actually work for it. And you're probably doing it so that you can work less, right? Which the Lord, of course, wants us to be stewards, not just of our money, but of our time and our bodies, of our abilities, I should say. So also the 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 entertainment part of this, the Bible doesn't necessarily call the Bible doesn't necessarily speak to gambling per se. Some people will say, well, there was the casting of lots, and there was the uh, the Umim and the Thummim, right? Well, the outcomes there were under God's purview and under God's watch. So when people sought the results from them, there was no risk involved and there was nothing on the line other than we will submit ourselves to whatever the Lord's choice is here. So that was not a gamble, and that's not a comparable option. So with that said, we got to be a little bit careful, or maybe very careful, about making blanket condemnations and sweeping generalizations. We cannot ever judge the motive of someone else. And so if someone like Phil and his wife, or Mike with you and your buddies at church, or like I'll give you this example too. When we went bowling a few weeks ago, the friends we were with, the son was betting the father was in the midst of bowling betting his son. His son had 3 strikes in a row, and he's like, I got $10 that you can't get to 5. Well, he got to 5.
Wow.
So yeah, so he got the $10. But between a father and a son, again, you're controlling the means there. You're really not risking anything. Are you teaching a good lesson? That can be debated, but there is, I think, a wholesome angle on this where motives should not be judged, or the best construction can be put on whatever the motives are without making sweeping condemnations, say. And by the way, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other factors here. So I would agree that I think gambling can be done with pure motives. The concern is always that slipping from, hey, we're just having budget determined, controlled environment entertainment here, the line, crossing the line into what becomes greed and competition and despising another because you lost, is very, very easily crossed. So do it, but do it with some caution that this could easily slip into other sins.
Because like I said earlier, the devil will twist anything that's good. You may try it with good motivation and so forth, and the devil will trick you. So Phil touched on this. If you budget your money for disposable income for entertainment, then I think it's fine. Just like you might budget your money to go to a concert or go out to eat or on a mini vacation, you can budget to say, I'm going to have this $100 to go play bingo or blackjack or the roulette wheel. But then you stay at your budget, whether you're winning or losing. It's the same thing like if you do any kind of auction and hey, I want this item, but this is my top price. And then you say, all right, it went beyond that. For example, we had around this time last year, we had a pancake breakfast for our teens to help raise money for our sending them to the youth rally. In fact, Water of Life and Racine, I saw they're doing that this week. And we had some high ticket items there to sell an auction, and then there were a couple of really high ticket ones that were it was just a bid, and one of them was a handmade knife specifically made for that auction. And I said that would look really good in Wyoming for hunting, and it went for like $600. I wasn't spending 600 as good as the knife was, and it was worth $600. That was the top price. I wasn't paying for it, but I set my price and I wasn't going above it because it was just entertainment.
Or you wanted to become the bridegroom of blood.
I don't understand that.
Well, that's the Abraham reference, or excuse me, the Moses reference, right? Moses.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Yes. It doesn't want to circumcise his sons. Thank you.
But thankfully they busted out the knife, so you had your potential tool there.
Yeah, I wasn't going to be using it for circumcising out here. And then with this too, with any kind of entertainment, you need to be budgeting it. The problem is we don't budget. Andy, you and I know this from doing any kind of counseling. A lot of the counseling comes in with marriage because there's not enough money and they're struggling. When we try and teach pre-marriage counseling, you talk budget. People have no concept. And so they're using their money on entertainment. They're spending way too much on DoorDash and then on Starbucks and so forth instead of just getting hotel coffee or church coffee. You're struggling to pay your bills, to buy food, fix your house, and yet you're spending money on going on vacation, gambling, buying fun toys. So for example, when I moved out here, I started going and giving plasma. And, it's about $100, $110 a week. And that was my entertainment money. I set that aside, first of all, for a trailer for my side by side. And then it was going to be, now that I paid for the trailer, then I was going to buy guns for protection while hiking, because we do have bears and mountain lions and so forth. And then protection for the house. And then all of a sudden, one day, about 3 weeks ago, the plasma center just up and closed. Seems like they didn't even tell their employees that they were closing. So now I have to sell eggs, which is going to take a lot longer to raise enough money for a handgun at $4 a dozen. Okay, but it's just entertainment, and so I can put that off, and that's not what our sinful nature wants to do. It always wants something now, and that's the addictiveness of gambling.
Well, and Mike,
So
so
yeah,
what you're sort of teasing out by implication here is maybe a difference in definition for gambling. If we were to define gambling in the way John Brugge, he wrote an essay on this in the seminary essay file, which by the way is a good resource for any of our listeners who, if they want to seek out some good reading material, not just on gambling, but of course on a lot of theological topics. The Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary essay file can be a good resource for you. But he wrote a little write-up on gambling, which I think is very constructive and helpful. And he said, I would define gambling as unnecessarily risking the possessions which God has entrusted to us in games of chance or skill in the hope of gaining something from our neighbor without giving him or her a fair service or product in return, whether for the sake of profit or thrills. So if you are unnecessarily risking something, that would be, of course, being careless with motive, means, method, whatever, stewardship of another, love of your neighbor. But if you, like in Phil's case, or in yours, Mike, coming to Vegas one time, maybe what you were doing is really not so much gambling because you were not unnecessarily risking something. You were simply enjoying a good time with your bride or with your buddies. So if you came to Vegas, say one time in your life as a Milwaukee native, and you were there for a conference and a couple of your buddies and you with a defined budget went out to the casino and you said, hey, I'll throw $100 on the table for blackjack or whatever else. If I win, I win. If I don't, I don't. Are you really gambling? Because the loss isn't something that you're unnecessarily risking. You're deliberately playing with it as a means and as a tool that God gave you to enjoy, which is part of stewardship too, is enjoying God's blessings. But when you are doing it out of desperation or out of greed or out of a quick hit, like the dopamine rush, say, that you can get from winning quickly, when you are unnecessarily entering into these types of activities, that's when everything is compromised. And then you have to sort of look in the mirror with your motives and ask whether or not you're actually being faithful to the Lord's word.
yeah, that's great. Thanks for that definition. I'll thank Dr. Brew too. Uh, so with this, we'll lead into the last bullet point. So, Annie, can Christians gamble professionally or intermittently with a clear conscience? And maybe touch on that stewardship versus waste that we were just kind of touching on at the last bullet point.
That is a tough one, and I think there's some nuance here too, based on what we've just discussed. I don't think we can make blanket condemnations or overstatements. For example, gentleman that I mentioned who plays high limit Omaha poker, he has a defined bankroll, and that's sort of in a separate account, and he lives off the proceeds or has to manage the losses of the bankroll that he uses. I think there's a fair discussion that could be had with a mature Christian, like Phil alluded to before. Is this the best Christian witness I could give? Is it going to be easy for me to explain to people how I make my way of life off of income from professional gambling? That's maybe a discussion that you could have with a Christian or a maturing Christian as you get into it. But initially, at least, I don't think we can automatically impugn the motives. However, there are sinful realities that we have to tease out with people who are even in this field. because I'm sure they're not immune to the temptations that we've just described.
Sure. I never thought of this, but what you were talking about with gambling and hurting the other person that you're gambling with. So perhaps, professional gambler, if you're going against, regular people like us and you're taking their money that's going to affect them uh, substantially, they could lose their house, they could lose their marriage and so forth. That might be different than if you're gambling against, the casino that has, they're making money. Is that kind of what you're talking about? That there might be an instance that's the
Yeah,
same person doing the same thing, but because of who you're gambling with, it could make a difference.
exactly. Yeah, and would you be willing? I mean, if it's for your livelihood, would you be willing to give some of it up if you knew that it deprives someone else of theirs?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a. I think we've already described. I think we've kind of answered the question.
sure. Yeah, and even just a silly example, like when I bet Shad and Steve here at church about wearing their Viking jersey versus the Packer jersey. Well, they're good sports. Uh, Steve, because he was ushering, he went in my office looking for the jersey, and I had set out on his usher chair, and he took it and grabbed it and put it on. He made a big show, but they're good sports. But if I was betting someone at church that would not be a good sport, well, then that would be on me. Again, a silly example, but if they're going to be embarrassed to do that, then that's on me. I shouldn't be embarrassing. And that's just a silly Packer jersey versus someone's income. So yeah, with stewardship and versus waste, Paul writes this to Timothy: instruct those who are rich in this present age not to be arrogant or to put their hope in the uncertainty of riches, but rather in God, who richly supplies us with all things for our enjoyment. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they are storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. And then, Phil, if you want to touch on this one too, maybe talk about the work ethic involved with gambling versus not gambling and just working hard. Because we've touched on this a little bit. There's that quick fix. I need this money, and the best way to do it is gambling versus just working hard and then earning something over time.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. So when I'm traveling on the road, I keep my Bible reading pretty simple. I do a couple Psalms, chapter out of Proverbs, chapter out of Ecclesiastes, and I just rotate that over and over and over. So Ecclesiastes, one of Solomon's points is don't overwork to become rich, right? So not even speaking about gambling, but just speaking about working too. If you're working 80 hours a week and neglecting your time in the Bible or neglecting your kids or not giving your wife the attention and the love that relationship demands, then you're doing something wrong, whether it's working for your corporate job or your side hustle or gambling. Right. So we need to not be so focused on that revenue generation that it distracts us from the responsibilities that God has given us. Um, uh, Solomon also said that he who loves money will never be satisfied, right? So if your goal is simply the number in the bank account, you'll never have enough, right? You could be Jeff Bezos and have, billions at your disposal, but you're going to want more to do something more in the future, right? Um, so yeah, in short, it's the heart, the underlying heart of what's my motivation here. And so then once you get past the sin or not sin threshold, we now are in the territory of wisdom, right? What's the best use of my time? What's the best use of my resources? And yeah, within my time, I have some disposable income to do whatever hobbies or interests I have. Um, Gambling in a casino, again, it's something I would do rarely and spontaneously, but at the same time, those casinos are set up to manipulate people, right? There are no windows to the outside world. You have no idea what time of day it is. They have the lights set up at just the right level so you feel like it's midday constantly. There's waitresses bringing you stuff to drink so that you don't have to leave your seat. The only reason you'd ever leave your seat is go to the bathroom, right? So we do
Free
have to realize.
drinks, free drinks,
Right.
and not ugly waitresses.
Right, right. So you do have to realize that the system is set up to manipulate you and manipulate your neighbor. And so, I do think at that point it's a question of wisdom and conscience. But that happens so many times in real life, right? If you remember the 2008 housing crisis, a big contributor to that were these predatory loans, right? These 80/20 loans where they'd loan you 20% down payment, interest only, so that you could get the 80% loan on the rest of the house, right? A lot of people lost money because of that. They didn't understand how it works. They over leveraged themselves. My wife and I used that program to buy our first house, and we paid it off, and it was a blessing to us. So there is wisdom in there of, do you support a predatory system, or within a system, can you operate as a Christian and use it in a God-pleasing way? Right. And so again, we're out of the realm of sin and we're into the realm of wisdom and judgment.
Yeah. And then with that too, with work ethic, Paul writes this to the Ephesians, uh, let the one who has been stealing steal no longer. Instead, let him work hard doing what is good with his own hands so that he has something to share with a person who's in need. And with that, we often appreciate something more when we work hard for it than if we're just given it or we win it. I think of, say, if one of my teen daughters, she said, if she said, Dad, can you buy me, one of their frappuccinos or something at Starbucks, or some of those holy jeans at Kohl's, as opposed to like working hard and earning the holes in your jeans, buying jeans that are pre-made with holes in it. And if I would buy those things for, well, that's nice, it's a good gift from Dad, but she may not appreciate them. But if she's working hard, like at a waitress as a waitress at a restaurant, and then she earns it, she's going to appreciate those things more. Or usually what happens is after they start earning their own money, they don't want to spend their money on frivolous things because they realize I worked 5 hours for this. Do I really need this pair of jeans? Okay, so work, hard work versus just winning something. So the last point I have on this for you, Andy, is about trust in God when it comes with gambling, because gambling promotes luck or chance, whereas we as Christians, we don't believe in luck or chance. So go ahead and touch on that.
I had an opportunity to do a text study on Psalm 121 for our circuit meeting a couple of weeks ago. And it's a very simple point. This is not going to blow anyone away with depth or insight, but Psalm 21, what I really learned to appreciate is not just the Lord's attentive care over our souls, although that's implicit in the psalm, but his overt care for our bodies and our lives. And to the degree that God extends himself or exhausts himself at first article to be our maker, preserver, provider, protector, we really don't want to risk his providence. We want to reflect appreciation and gratitude for that, don't we? One quick anecdote about that. So when I first moved to Vegas, there was an old Pennsylvanian bookie named Frank, who was a member of our church, very colorful individual. And he was retired. He and his wife literally moved out to Vegas with a duffel bag full of cash. And that was their retirement. And they just lived off that cash little by little, whittled it down in their retirement. And in the course of their retirement, they were discovered by the former pastor here who basically witnessed to them and converted them. So anyway, Frank used to, during the college football season, always buy me a little, maybe like a $3 or a $5 money line ticket from the South Point Casino on the Wisconsin Badgers football team, because he would say, Wisconsin always covers. Wisconsin always covers. Well, that has changed, by the way. So don't follow my betting advice. That's not what I'm here for. But I will say, rare was the ticket that he put on the line for me that ever actually won. I think I can count on one hand how many of the tickets he put down for me that actually won, because just the way it worked out. But then Frank died, and I know he died a man of faith. And while he was on hospice, I visited him. He died shortly after a Super Bowl. And while he was on hospice, I bought him like a little $5 money line ticket and took it to him when he was on his hospice bed. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about you. And here's one for you for once. I'm just returning the favor. Well, guess what? That ticket lost as well. So my sermon theme for him for his funeral was Jesus punched for Frank the winning ticket, because I got to say so many of the things that we put on the line in our lives fail, don't they? But what Christ puts on the line on our behalf is always secure, and we never have to worry ever. But in gratitude for that promise, we want to be discerning, as Phil mentioned, wise stewards of what God has given us. There may be time in Christian wisdom where we can enjoy some entertainment at a casino or wherever else. You might buy one token lottery ticket just for fun or whatever. But at the same time, in wisdom, we're going to be discerning about our proximity to those behaviors.
Yeah, so it's luck versus providence. So we knew Phil was going to be doing this, so Andy was betting that Phil would be good. I trust in God's providence, Phil would be good. So
Something like that.
something like that, or maybe I'm being facetious. So Phil, if you want to say anything else to wrap this up, anything having to do with gambling before I finish up with some of my thoughts on luck and trust.
Sure. Well, two last Bible passages, right? Solomon does say time and chance happen to all, right? We will not. What appears to us to be chance, though, is determined by God, right? The lot is cast into the lap, but the decision is from the Lord. So I think, that's a good way to end it, right? What may appear to us to be luck or chance is not really luck or chance. God's eternally present, and He is guiding our lives and our decisions, small and great.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and even we as Christians uh, fall into this idea of luck. One of my biggest pet peeves, and maybe you've seen this, Andy, I go to visit some of my older members, shut-ins, and you always ask, well, how are you doing? And then you'll have like 10, 15 minutes of their medical issues. But some will say, oh, things been really good lately, Pastor, knock on wood. Oh, that is so pagan. Okay. Don't knock on wood. Okay. Because they're always looking for some wood too, because there's no wood in a real house anymore. Okay. That's paganism of believing in luck. In college, I remember, hey, we're on a winning streak. So you don't change your socks. You keep wearing those same dirty, nasty socks in practice and games. Uh, at professional athletes, they are big on superstition. And so I don't know who this baseball player was anymore, but he would always have the same chicken dinner every meal before a game. The movie Major League, where the big black guy who is hitting home runs or he'd strike out, he can't hit the curveball, so he'd be praying to Jobu, the god in his locker, and burning incense. And he wanted to butcher chicken, and so they brought in a KFC bucket of fried chicken for him. All of that is luck, and we don't believe in luck. For me, if someone says good luck, I'll always reply Lord's blessings. I saw this the other day. I don't believe in luck. I believe in Jesus, because nothing is controlled by blind faith. Everything's directed by God's providence. So when I was prepping for this last night, I was scrolling through my Facebook feed looking for the specific shirt. It kept popping up all the time until the time I was looking for it. I finally did a Google search and I clicked on it. So now it will always pop up because I look for it. And I love this shirt, and we'll end with this one. It says, luck is for heretics. And then Proverbs 16:33, and that which is, lots are cast into the pouch, but the Lord determines all their decisions. Uh, so Lord's blessings on your week. And thanks for joining us this week, Phil.